sponsors of weather on GB News.
How would you like an extra £3,000 in your bank account each month for an entire year? Well, it could be yours with our £36,000 secret salary to be won. You'll get £36,000 in cash to do whatever you like with over the coming year. And the best news? It's totally tax-free, which means you'll get every penny to spend. For a chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, it's not new Labour, but old Labour that is in charge now, scaring off businesses with its hard-left policies. As a brutal budget of tax rises approaches next month, are we to expect a mass exodus of business and talent? The government continues to shy away from allegations of cronyism and hypocrisy, but tonight, I'll be joined by one man who has done more than anyone to unveil Labour's dodgy dealings. A top British university is trying to abolish the Anglo-Saxons, a bit late, in an attempt to decolonise the curriculum. Plus, Twitter man Elon Musk has found himself in a free speech showdown with the Brazilian Supreme Court. I'll be joined by a barrister on the front line of the free speech battle. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my particularly punctilious panel, Daily Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As always, it's a crucial part of the programme. I want to know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's one of your favourite times of the day, the News Bulletin with Will Hollis.
Good evening, Jacob. Thank you. I'm Will Hollis with your updates at 8 o'clock. The Home Secretary has committed to a rapid review of extremism on her return to the Commons today. Yvette Cooper updated Parliament on the government's response to riots which erupted across the UK following the killing of 3 children in Southport. The Home Secretary referred to rioters as racists, calling them thugs. Now, it comes as the wife of a Conservative councillor pleads guilty to publishing written material to stir up racial hatred. 41-year-old childminder Lucy Connolly called for mass deportations and attacks on hotels housing asylum seekers in a post on X on the same day as the stabbings. She later apologised for acting on false and malicious information. Lucy is the wife of Councillor Raymond Connolly. In Israel, the country's Prime Minister has vowed he will make Hamas pay for the killing of 6 hostages in Gaza. Speaking at a press conference in Jerusalem, Benjamin Netanyahu said that Hamas will pay a heavy price for the hostage deaths, calling it a massacre. It comes as an Israeli court rules that a general strike shutting the country's economy must end. Israel's entire economy is striking in a bid to pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu into accepting a Gaza ceasefire deal. And back in the Commons, the government has announced it is to suspend the sale of some weapons to Israel. Foreign Secretary David Lammy said 30 out of 350 arms export licences are to end due to clear risk they could be used in a violation of humanitarian laws. Israel continues to face international criticism for its war against Hamas in Gaza. To the Tory leadership contest now. James Cleverly's launched his bid today, vowing to bring back the Rwanda plan. Cleverly also highlighted the need for the UK to remake the argument for capitalism, to boost economic growth and give younger people a stake in society. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch launched her Tory leadership campaign today too, calling for change in the Conservative Party. The Shadow Community Secretary and contender to replace Rishi Sunak says her party has to focus on renewal to be ready to return to power. And finally, the government has promised to look into dynamic ticket pricing after sales for the Oasis reunion. On Saturday, fans of the world-famous band sat in virtual queues for hours, hoping to get their hands on tickets to one of those shows next year. But at the checkout stage, the face value had rocketed, rising from £148 to £355 in some cases. That's it for now. I'll have more for you in an hour, but for now, it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Last week, it was revealed that the Prime Minister removed a portrait of Lady Thatcher from her former study in 10 Downing Street. And while it may have been within his rights to do this, the move speaks volumes about the Labour Party's mean-mindedness. It only governs for its own. On the horizon, there are 2 key changes that have prompted a collapse in confidence from business leaders. First, Labour plans to overhaul workers' rights. Anyone looking at the British economy understands that the problem is not that we are overworked. There are 5.5 million working-age people on out-of-work benefits in this country. But equally importantly, productivity has been flat over the past 2 decades and a half and has declined in the public sector since 1997. But what is Labour's solution? To inflate workers' rights, to turn the UK into a mini-European Union. British businesses now face the prospect of the right to switch off, the right to work from home, and the right to a 4-day week. It also undermines contract rights and treats employees as simpletons who cannot make choices for themselves without the big state supervising them. Second, tax rises are on the way in the budget next month. The Treasury, led by Rachel Reeves, cynically manufactured the pretence for the tax rises when she claimed there was a £22 billion fiscal black hole left by the Tories. Of course, what she didn't admit was that the hole was created by her own inflation-busting pay rise for her trade union friends. But it's safe to say we can expect tax rises, including a hike of capital gains tax, which reduces investment in our economy, leads to the misallocation of capital, and discourages innovation or the establishment of new businesses. Look no further than the latest report from Offshore Energy's UK that has claimed 35,000 North Sea gas and oil jobs are at risk as ministers consider increasing the headline tax rate on upstream oil and gas activities from 75% to 78%. And this is before we get into the hostility of actually getting oil out of the ground that's coming from Ed Miliband's department. For months, we've been told of all Labour's fantastical plans that they will be funded by growing the economy. But you don't grow the economy by bashing business. The signs prove nothing has changed since Margaret Thatcher said this over 30 years ago.
The fact is, Labour are still socialist and they deliberately set out to impose more government control over people's lives. That is where their whole belief starts. It starts with the power of government over the lives of the people. That is the reason why they increase taxation. More power for them over our money, less power for the citizen.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But with me now is my most punctilious panel, Daily Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Amy, why does Labour hate business?
Labour doesn't hate business, and business doesn't hate Labour, because polling just suggests that business leaders have more faith in Labour than the Conservatives.
Well, polling's shown a collapse in support for Labour since the election. I mean, it's been quite extraordinary how trust in, what's his name, Sir Keir, has fallen since the 4th of July.
I don't think you need to worry, though. This is all just a bit of fear-mongering at the moment, because nothing's really happened yet. And what will businesses benefit from the most will be stability, productivity, which all these plans will lead to. Stop being so short-termism about this.
Where's productivity coming from if you make it more bureaucratic for businesses to employ people?
Well, because it will lead to stability in the workforce.
Where's the stability coming from?
From having... Where's the stability coming from?
Where do the jobs come from? Employers don't take people on.
We have a massive recruitment and retention problem at the moment in nearly every sector. So in order to contend with that, of course we need to bring in
putting more regulations on doesn't help.
But it's regulations in terms of
why does workers' rights from day one help?
At one point, you probably would have said the same thing about holiday pay. You would have said the same thing about maternity pay. This is progress. Giving workers more rights will lead to more productivity and stability in the future.
No, you're confusing two things. There may be rights that you think workers should have, but they don't axiomatically increase productivity. Indeed, they're likely to decrease productivity. Giving people more holidays decreases productivity.
What will cost businesses more? Businesses will suffer and have to pay more if we have constant movement in the markets. We need stability, and I think these things will deliver that.
But companies create stability for themselves. If they have good employees, they have an incentive to pay them more, to give them better terms and conditions.
But that's just
it's much better done by the market than by government regulation, which deters employers from taking on staff in the first place.
Or maybe it's better regulated by joining a union.
Tim, I mean, it just seems to me this is guaranteed to make our productivity problem worse and get less work out of employees.
The issue here is that Labour ran on growth. And they keep saying, and Rachel Reeves says, we must have growth, right? They also ran on stability. But there's a slight tension between the two. Because if it all just comes back to we will make sure there's macroeconomic stability, but then we will also do lots of little bits of regulating and raise all sorts of taxes in order to make the budget balance, at the same time as we're allocating new money to new things, like nationalising the railways or creating a British energy company and things like that. It's not actually clear where the growth comes from. And then on top of that, as you say, there's the additional regulation when it comes to employment. But there's also things like a windfall tax, which sounds like a very good, easy way to raise money. But of course, what it does is it kills long-term investment and long-term planning, not just because the business affected will lose profit, but also because other businesses will say, should I invest here? Because there's a risk that if I have a successful year, the government will take the profit from me.
But you're talking about oil and gas companies.
Right, yeah.
Oil and gas companies, which surely, ultimately, we will want to deter investment from, because we want to encourage investment into renewable energy.
Right, but at the same time, we all know we still have to use oil and gas for a short period while we move towards becoming net zero. But either way, there is this fundamental tension between the need for growth, which is Rachel Reeves's message, and the need to do certain things which Labour is committed to its base to do, which won't actually increase growth and, in fact, might actually suppress it. And on the point about employment and conditions, there are some elements of its employment package I'm very sympathetic towards, but the baseline stuff is things like raising public pay for public sector workers. If that's not linked to a commitment to improve productivity, it's just going to cost the taxpayer more money. It's not going to provide a better service. So I don't see what that does for the economy or for growth.
Because we found that plugging the gaps with these recruitment and retention problems that have come from not being able to keep workers where they are, that has cost millions.
But Amy, this completely misses
using agency
the point.
staff in those positions has cost millions. And the small matter of Brexit has cost us absolutely billions.
Businesses have an overwhelming incentive to keep good staff. They need to be able to get rid of bad staff.
But in the public sector, they weren't given the option to raise the wages. So now they are. That will increase
And there's been a lot of mismanagement in the public sector and failure to keep people, but there's been masses of increase in the number of people employed in the public sector. The public sector since 1997 has seen productivity decrease. We have nearly 100,000 more civil servants than we had in 2016. We took them on to implement Brexit and to deal with COVID. Not one of them's been removed from that, and productivity has collapsed. And the socialists are giving them more money and asking less work of them. This is disastrous because every job in the public sector has to be paid for by somebody in the private sector.
It just feels like Labour could say, we're going to give you all £1 million and a baby unicorn, and you would still have the hump.
Yes, because it was a stupid thing to say to people.
Because I would be paying for his baby unicorn. That's the problem. It doesn't. Governments don't create
I'm paying for his
wealth.
baby unicorn.
They're
His
taken
baby
from
unicorn
someone else.
called Brexit. We're
Right.
all paying for his baby unicorn. That's the main problem here. We have this massive black hole, which was fundamentally caused by a number of things, but Brexit was a massive one.
There's nothing to do with Brexit. This is government policy.
Where we are because of Brexit. We're not
Why is it that the British economy is doing better than the German economy?
Why is it?
Yes, we've left the European Union, they haven't.
Us leaving the European
being in the European Union has not been this panacea.
Just put Brexit aside from it, because goodness, we've got to stop arguing about Brexit at some point in this country's history. You raised the point about stability. Jacob has asked the question about why might business confidence be declining. Well, just think about the messaging, because the government hasn't done very much yet, but think about the messaging of the last few months. One, it is saying that this is the worst economy since the Second World War, and two, it is saying we will raise taxes. Well, under those conditions, who on earth would choose to invest in this country? If nothing else, it's a very strange messaging strategy.
It's a completely dreadful message. Doom and despair. Anyway, thank you to my panel. With me now is Professor of Economics at King's College London, Jonathan Portes. Jonathan, thank you as always for joining me. I don't know if you heard Tim's question, but saying that this is the worst economy since the Second World War and we're going to have to raise taxes isn't going to encourage foreign companies to invest here, is it?
I do think there's a risk there, and I agree with quite a bit of what Tim was saying. But first, I'll just go back to something you said, Jacob. Do you think that labour productivity is higher here or in France?
Oh, it's higher in France. There are all sorts of questions, but there are all sorts of questions, as you know perfectly well, about how productivity is measured, and there are differences in the measurement of productivity between the UK and France. So you have to take those into account as well.
And do you think that any economist thinks that, despite these differences in measurements, where do you think there? Would any economist tell you where is productivity higher? In the UK or in France? Where is
as I said to you, there are measurement issues, but would you rather have the French economy or the British economy? And I'd much rather have the British economy. We've got better levels of employment.
That's true. But I just wanted to focus on productivity because you mentioned employment regulation. There is no doubt, nobody denies it, and I don't think even you would deny it, that the UK has both less regulation of labour, less employment regulation than France, and also significantly lower levels of labour productivity. French workers produce more in an hour,
what about America? What about America, which has less employment protection and higher productivity? The American route seems to me a much more preferable one.
In some ways, but actually similar productivity to France. But the idea that employment regulation necessarily leads to lower productivity simply isn't true. We know that from the
but hold on, Jonathan.
We know that
because,
from France.
Well, you're very selective because you've got higher unemployment in France, and if you take productivity against everybody who could be available to be productive, if you have very large numbers who aren't employed, you get a worse situation. It's why America is so strong, because it has both high productivity and high levels of employment. And that's the model that has proved most successful.
That is true. But nonetheless, France still does slightly better than we do overall, even taking account of that. You should be very careful about, I share your view that, you have to be careful about employment regulation and not over-regulate. But the idea that more employment regulation is necessarily going to be bad for jobs and productivity is one which no serious empirical economist would buy anymore, I'm afraid. Because it just
there's a point you make on productivity. I think to say that it doesn't have an effect on employment rates is quite a leap of faith.
Well, we found out, as you know, I think that when the minimum wage was introduced, there was a lot of people, including the entire Conservative Party, said that it would lead to a very sharp fall in employment. We know now.
And that was wrong. That was wrong. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a minimum wage doesn't reduce employment levels. It came in at a very high level of economic growth. So there are always some nuance in this. Well, Jonathan, I'm afraid we've got to end there, but thank you for providing some nuance to this debate.
Thank you.
In a moment, you'll be hearing from the man who has done more than anyone to hold this Labour government to account over its cronyism and hypocrisy and jobs for the boys.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales could be back to full duties by the autumn. This would be wonderful news.
Well, I actually don't think she is going to be back to full-time duties by the autumn. I think that's how I read it. But in fact, I think what they were saying, this is a report by the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, is that Catherine is still recovering and she's still having treatment, but she doubts whether she'll be back to full-time duties, but we will be seeing her. So we will be, seeing her at big royal events, and she'll, if she's up to it, she will, appear now and then, but most of her work will be done from home because she's still having the cancer treatment. And as she said way back in the summer, she has good days and she has bad days.
Yeah, and we can all understand that, can't we? But it does make such a difference, doesn't it, to catch glimpses of her and seeing her and William this week congratulating the GB athletes after the success at the Olympics. It really does make all the difference just to see her, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I think, she wants to get out there, but I don't think she's going to be back at the daily chore of royal duties, visiting hospitals, things like that. I don't think she'd be strong enough to do that. But, she looks terrific. We know she's had a brutal year, in fact, probably much, much worse than any of us can imagine. And so she's, doing what her doctors are telling her. She's taking it very gently. I'm sure she wants to go full steam ahead, but she is being restrained, as it were.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. We were discussing Labour's hate on business, and you may have been sending in lots of mail logs, but nobody's given them to me, so unfortunately I cannot tell you what pearls of wisdom you've sent in. I'll read them out in the next segment. On a theme that keeps on recurring, Labour donors have been rewarded by appointments to civil service roles at the highest levels of government. One benefactor was even given his own number 10 pass. It all has a nostalgic familiarity of the Blair days. The Civil Service Commission has now announced a review of Labour's appointments after the election. Last week, a donor who was appointed as an HM Treasury Director was forced to resign. Aside from cronyism, the civil service is in deep need of reform, and the eerie growth of a British-style spoil system will hardly help. Change to the structure is essential. Ministers, the ones held responsible for their department's failures, or indeed successes, must be given control of their briefs and the ability to drive the change that the British economy and society need. Well, I'm joined now by Henry Newman, author of the Whitehall Project blog and former Conservative Special Advisor to Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. Henry, thank you very much for coming in. You saw Whitehall from the inside for the best part of 15 years and saw where it failed. Where did you see the disconnect between a minister making a decision and the civil servant implementing it?
Exactly. I think what I saw all too often was a minister pulling a lever and precisely nothing happening. And I think you and I were privileged to work in government with many civil servants who are brilliantly committed to supporting the government of the day, whatever its political complexion. I think probably a majority of civil servants dress to the left, but I also think most civil servants abhor the idea of explicit party political affiliation and take very seriously the idea that they're politically impartial. But I think there is a problem with delivery in the civil service, and there's a problem with the public sector more broadly. That's at the root of some of the productivity problems our economy is seeing. And what depresses me about this cronyism scandal with Labour is I think that the country is in danger of lurching in precisely the wrong direction. What we actually need is to have clearer powers for ministers to get stuff done. If they go to the trouble of winning a democratic mandate from the people, they should be able to deliver that change in government. And yet I think we're in danger of seeing precisely the reverse happen. And Labour, which promised to come into government with higher standards, they spent a lot of time pontificating in opposition about just how terrible the Conservatives have been. As soon as they came into government, they've made many of the same mistakes that they criticised the Conservatives for doing.
Well, one of those extraordinary appointments seems to be to propriety and ethics, the central safeguarding of good behaviour in government, and they've appointed a friend of the Labour Party.
Exactly. There was a woman who's had a background working for a variety of think tanks. She clearly is very knowledgeable about the Constitution, but she'd also worked for Labour Together. It's a slightly strange organisation. It's a sort of American-style super PAC. That's a funding organisation that's explicitly devoted to helping the Labour Party win power. She worked for Labour Together. Labour Together also donated to one of the ministers in the Cabinet Office, for whom she was also working in opposition. That minister then, I think, sought to appoint her in government. That's highly problematic. As you said, the fact that she's working in the propriety team, that's supposed to be the sort of constitutional guardian, really, in the heart of the Cabinet Office. And secondly, that I think there's this link with the donations, and there's also been links with donations around other appointments. And I think I'm not going to stand here and say Conservative ministers didn't bring people into government. Of course they did. But the people that they brought into government, into civil service roles, were typically a speechwriter, a diary manager, relatively sort of circumscribed roles where they didn't have wider line management responsibilities for core civil servants, and they were broadly working within what's called the minister's private office.
And they could appoint special advisors. It may be useful to explain, what did you do as a special advisor? What was your role and how powerful were you? Could you instruct civil servants?
No, special advisors have basically no power to instruct civil servants. Your power flows purely from your minister. Your minister is in charge of the department, at least in theory. But in reality, ministers can only make a tiny handful of appointments directly. That's just their special advisors. And even those special advisors require explicit sign-off from the Prime Minister. What special advisors do, really, is serve as an eyes and ears of the minister inside the department. You can help the minister achieve their aims. Some of them, of course, have reached a great deal of notoriety. But I think part of the problem with special advisors, of course, is that you're entirely behind closed doors, so you can't speak publicly.
And as soon as the minister goes, the special advisor goes. It's not a permanent role, whereas this role in propriety and ethics is a permanent role.
Well, it's for 2 years, yes, and I think she could then subsequently become permanent, up to 2 years.
Right, OK.
And I think exactly as you said, special advisors are temporary, but they're also explicitly given a licence to be political. So I'm a card-carrying Conservative. I was able to be a special advisor, which is a form of civil servant, but I was sort of exempted from the requirement to be politically impartial, like other civil servants.
What power would you give to ministers to have more special advisors or to make more political appointments? Do you think going down a more American route is the right way for the UK to go, assuming it's honest and open about it?
I don't think a full American-style system is good. I think it's unhealthy. You're talking about the spoils system earlier, where you have long confirmation hearings. It's very difficult to get anything done for many months in government. I wouldn't favour that. And I think the idea of having a permanent, impartial civil service is a good one. But I think ministers do also need some more power, perhaps a few more special advisors. I think that would be proportionate. I also think I'm not explicitly against people with a political background working in the civil service, but it needs to be transparent. And I think some of the problems that Labour have got themselves into are around three things in particular. One, the link to donations. Rachel Reeves appointed Ian Caulfield. He was a personal donor of hers to the Treasury. That's unprecedented, I think, as a civil servant appointment. Secondly, this woman you're referring to in the propriety team, I don't think we should be putting political people into the heart of government departments' sort of propriety and constitutional guardianship roles. That's obviously inappropriate. And thirdly, I think the seniority of some of the appointments is a little bit surprising. So another lady from Labour Together clearly knows a great deal about digital governments and government transformation, something the government badly needs. But she was appointed, I think, at just 34 years old as a Director General. And that's been raising eyebrows in Whitehall. Director General is a very senior role within government. It's normally one down from the top Sir Humphrey level position. So for somebody to jump into that without Whitehall experience, but with political experience, is causing concern.
Is unusual, and it shows a willingness to change the system without being straight about it. That's what's causing the concern.
And I think if you believe in, I believe in evolution, not revolution of the system. I would like to see some sensible steps towards a reform. But I think we need to make the case for that and win that argument publicly.
The other thing that I think was difficult for ministers is that civil servants actually did a perfectly proper job, and they would come to a minister and say, you can't do that because it's against the Equality Act or it's against the Human Rights Act. That Parliament has circumscribed what ministers can do.
Yes.
And that the civil servants are the police of that.
Yes.
Is there also a case for a more constitutional act to give powers back to ministers to allow them to do their job?
But I think certainly at a bare minimum, legislators should think very carefully about placing new legislative burdens on the government or on ministers. Because if you do, don't be surprised when, if you make it to a ministerial office, you're suddenly told, no, you can't do this because of a law that you passed previously. And I think this is this has been a certain naivety around a lot of our politics, that we've actually limited the hands of ministers. One of the reasons for leaving the European Union was to allow us to take back control of our laws and our legislation more broadly. And I think we should be doing that. And we should be thinking very carefully. I'm not saying we should tear up the entire legislative framework, but taking a proportionate approach to legislation is important. And equally, a lot of government is befuddled by constant judicial reviews. Ministers get very irritated by this. But I think the judges would argue, and the lawyers would argue, that they're enforcing the laws that Parliament passed.
Yes, Yvette Cooper is getting caught up with lots of judicial reviews coming from our old friends, which I feel serves her right. Henry, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, I'll be attempting to explain why the roots of this country are racist and why that means we should cancel the Anglo-Saxons.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. We've seen some big thunderstorms through the day today. Still a few rumbling on at the moment, but they are going to fade overnight. Tomorrow, a mix of sunshine and showers, and it is steadily turning fresher from the west. Quite warm and humid, though, in places at the moment. Our air is coming up from the south. This low pressure generating the heavy thundery showers, steadily clearing from northeast Scotland and then the Northern Isles. But some storms rumbling on well into this evening over parts of the Midlands, Northern England and Wales. They should start to ease through the early hours. Still quite warm and humid and murky over central and eastern parts, but turning fresher and cooler further north and west. Temperatures in parts of Scotland well down into single figures. Generally a fine and a sunny start across Scotland tomorrow as well. Certainly a much brighter, drier day across the northeast. But in western Scotland, a line of cloud and rain is creeping back in. That's extending down into Northern Ireland, so a pretty glum start to proceedings tomorrow here. Quite a lot of mist and low clouds still across parts of England and Wales as well, and still a few showers here, still keeping going through the morning, so you may wake up to a bit of a wet start here. And as we go through the day, We could see some further heavy showers developing over parts of East Anglia and maybe the far southeast of England. Still hit and miss, but some heavy downpours possible, particularly in the early afternoon. Much of northern England, Wales, southwest England, though, drier and brighter compared to today. And we'll still have some outbreaks of rain coming into the far northwest. Turning cooler and fresher, we could still get into the 20s across East Anglia and the southeast. And certainly a cooler, fresher start across eastern areas for Wednesday morning. Again, many places seeing plenty of sunny spells, but we will see more showers developing as we go through the day, particularly for Wales and England, Northern Ireland. Not too many, though, across Scotland. And temperatures much fresher feel by Wednesday, high teens for most.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hooray!
Well, welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were discussing Donagate in the civil service. And Neil says, listen very carefully, Amy, I hardly ever agree with Amy, but she is right that paying better salaries to retain key public sector workers is necessary in some circumstances. I know of some newly qualified doctors quitting en masse to work in Australia for better pay, less hours, and, of course, the glorious climate. But then they'd go and work in Somerset, and they'd get a much nicer climate. Alex says, Jacob, and Alex clearly a socialist, Jacob, none of what we're seeing from Labour compares to what we saw from the Tories. Dodgy PPE contracts, partying in Downing Street, etc. And Philip says, the discussion reminds me of when Kwarteng sacked his permanent secretary and everyone lost their minds. Yes, indeed, they got a terrible old hissy fit about that. And he'd been working for months and months in Latin America somewhere. Hadn't been turning up the Treasury during COVID, so all this working from home stuff had gone to his head. So, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, the Right Honourable David Lammy, has said the United Kingdom would be suspending 30 out of 350 arms export licences to Israel, owing to what he called a clear risk that they might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. This, of course, is no surprise after the government dropped its challenge to the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor's request for an arrest warrant of Benjamin Netanyahu last month. Well, with me now is my panel, Daily Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Tim, the Labour Party is basically pro-Palestinian, isn't it? And it's gradually moving in this direction.
I think there's an issue of how much is its policy shaped by that political view. But I personally think this decision is proportionate. I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. It's worth remembering that even under the Tories, Gaza was classed as occupied territory. You've had the Gazan emergency, during which the Israeli government was accused by the Tory government of not acting fast enough to get humanitarian aid to people. There is a review coming out, which it is expected will say that there are reasonable fears about aid getting fast enough to people, but also that prisoners have been potentially mistreated. Plus, Joe Biden has just said that Benjamin Netanyahu has not acted fast enough to help release the hostages. So given that the government...
Ridiculous, though, isn't it?
Just to finish that point, the fact that the government is only suspending 30 licences, that's less than 10%, and they're all related to equipment which could potentially be used in with relation to access to humanitarian aid and mistreatment of prisoners, it does not seem to me like a particularly...
But on the hostages point, it's just ridiculous that Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, wants Israeli hostages to be released. That is in his main interest. But that doesn't mean that he has to give in to Hamas's demands or requests.
No, and that is his line. But of course, Israeli opinion on this is divided. And there have been protests against him by Israelis who feel that his stance has actually delayed the release of hostages and they would like to see more negotiation.
Including the families of the hostages.
Yes, but the lesson is that if you give in to hostage takers, they take more hostages. Governments have to be firm and show leadership in this area.
I think the point...
It was like the US government giving £6 billion to Iran just before the atrocities in October of last year.
We're coming up to almost 1 year of seeing these horrific images coming out of Gaza. 1 year. You can't call it defence anymore. It's not been defence since about the first
But surely
month
it is, because it is still a hotbed of terrorism against the Israeli state, which is a democratic, legitimate state and ally of the UK.
There are hospitals that have been bombed. There are refugee camps.
There are hospitals that have been bombed that have been cover for terrorists.
Children in the Gaza aren't likely to be shot. They're likely to die of famine. There are children eating animal feed. This is the point.
But this is the fault of Hamas. This is not the fault of Israel.
This is certainly not the fault of those children.
Unfortunately, it's the innocent Gazans who are paying the price.
Of their government.
Of what Hamas has done, but also for what strategy Netanyahu has chosen to use.
But what does Israel have? Israel can't say, oh, this is fine. Business normal, and we'll give you aid which will then be stolen by the terrorists.
No,
Are we being utterly unrealistic in how you have to wage war? Waging war is not a pleasant business.
Then what is the end? What would be
the end? Must be a victory for Israel.
But what does that consist of? What
that
does
means
that look like?
they managed to root out the terrorists.
But foreign governments, not just ours, have pushed the Israelis hard to allow easier access to humanitarian aid.
But essentially to be appeasing, not to win.
No, come on.
Do we want Israel to win or not?
At the very beginning, there were Israeli politicians who didn't want any humanitarian aid to go to the Gazans. This had to be pushed by foreign governments. And it is a basic rule of war that you don't target civilians and you do your utmost to make sure
in the Second World War.
Regrettably.
But we did because we were in an all-out war which we had to win for the existence of our state.
Regrettably, can I add, just to raise the stakes, regrettably, and in the course of doing that, I believe we committed war crimes for which we could very reasonably have been prosecuted, such as the bombing of Dresden.
Well, as you say, I think that's absolute nonsense.
The fact that we did it does not.
I think we were in a state of total. We were in a state of total war, and there were important railway lines at Dresden, and we had a right to try and destroy them.
But at that point, the two parties were kind of equal in military might. Here, you've got Israel, one of the strongest militaries in the world, versus...
But terrorist organisations don't need to be equal in military might. They can cause devastating consequences with a small number of people.
I think most people would agree now that surely the endgame, the solution to this will look like recognising the Palestinian state, to remove the occupation. That's surely what an endgame looks like, compared to saying we're going to root out terrorists, because that doesn't get you anywhere, because every time one of those children is killed, one of the times those parents are grieving, it's a recruitment drive for Hamas.
Whether that is the long-term outcome or not, if you want to get these particular sanctions lifted, which I suspect are not very important, are really symbolic, you only have to meet the two criteria of, one, guaranteeing that humanitarian aid gets to people, and secondly, not mistreating prisoners.
All right. Well, as viewers will remember from our previous reporting, universities are in dire financial trouble, so they're trying to get a bit of publicity, and we're going to help. The University of Nottingham gets some priority because it appears to be tackling nationalist narratives. The term Anglo-Saxon, I hope I don't have to give you a trigger warning for that, has been replaced by early medieval England as a description for a course offered. Despite the Angles and the Saxons being some of the most important migrants to our islands, the term is now apparently problematic. This has come as part of an attempt supposedly to decolonise the curriculum. But it forgets that our great hero, King Alfred, and the Anglo-Saxons were the most celebrated anti-colonists of their day, as they battled off the colonising Vikings. So they were early decolonisers. Students really ought to demand a discount on their fees from universities that peddle this sort of nonsense. Well, my panel is still with me. Come on, Amy. We should be proud Anglo-Saxons if that's what we are, or we should be Jutes or Picts or Celts.
Everyone's invited to the party. That's what this is about. So decolonising the curriculum is just about not seeing the party from just one perspective, but hearing about it from all of them to give us a rounded, inclusive look at what
but it is the Anglo-Saxon period.
Rather than one perspective.
All of them, which must logically therefore include Anglo-Saxons.
Of course it does. So this is just replacing it. What's the new name? Medieval history. Medieval Britain.
Yeah.
So it's just saying there were Anglo-Saxons, there were these people, there were these guys.
Yeah, but the key people are the Anglo-Saxons.
They might be the key people, but there are
That's
other
what matters.
characters
And
involved.
they've always been called the Anglo-Saxons. What's the point of changing it? Who is offended by it being called Anglo-Saxon?
Oh, no, no one. This is an American culture war import. This is partly because in America the phrase Anglo-Saxon does indeed have racial connotations, because in the 19th century it was attached to ideas of Protestant uniqueness, the white Anglo-Saxon.
But the Anglo-Saxons were Catholics.
Either way, this is an American concern which has been imported to British universities, and it's being pursued in part because it's about promoting the narrative that there really is no settled indigenous peoples in Britain. We are simply, have always been, a rainbow nation of migrants. Now, there is some element of truth to that, because the Angles and Saxons indeed did come from mainland Europe, but they were here for 1,500 years. They were developing a polity. We can reasonably apply the label of and talk about an Anglo-Saxon peoples. And in a world in which we are multicultural, and rightly you can be proudly Punjabi British, Asian British, Jamaican British, it's just strange that the one thing apparently you now cannot be is Anglo-Saxon.
But isn't it like looking back on this period of history and calling it white Britain? It's just not the case. There are plenty of people around, so you would call it Britain and then talk about all the different types of people. So isn't the point...
Well, there weren't really that many different people in Anglo-Saxon Britain. There were a few ancient Britons, and they pushed off basically to Cornwall and Wales.
But it's including those people too, isn't it? That's all this is.
No, it's not. It's just applying a modern...
That's what decolonising is.
No, it's absolute nonsense. What Tim was saying is right. It's an attempt to apply a modern political sensitivity from the United States to the discussion of 8th century English history.
Britain was never really the case? Because an all-white Britain was never really the case. They might have been the majority, but it's including those other voices. Isn't that the whole point of this?
Well, really, race relations was not a major issue for 8th century kings of Wessex.
It just wasn't. There was a context, a global context, which involved people other than Anglo-Saxons. And I think that's what this is including.
So, on the basis that there was one Ottoman trader staying in Londinium at a certain point, we're going to redefine we're going to reclassify an entire historical period so that Ottoman feels included. This is. I just come back to this is an American culture war concern. It is not a live issue within British academia.
But Cambridge University have changed the name of the module.
Yes.
Nottingham University has now changed.
Don't assume that whatever they do is motivated by anything other than
That's the logic, isn't it? Including all the voices and all the perspectives.
Yes, but we come back to the question of, if that is the case, then why can we not acknowledge the existence of an Anglo-Saxon polity?
Because every time we talk about this, we say it's erasing it, it's erasing it. It's not, it's just including everyone else.
Right.
But there wasn't anybody else to include, really. I mean, there were some Vikings who are baddies in this context. Let's be clear about this. There were the Jutes, but nobody really knows where the Jutes came from. There were some ancient Britons. What I don't know is that the...
I said Ottomans, by the way. They came along a bit
later.
Very long time later.
But a bit earlier, there's Joseph of Arimathea, so perhaps we'll include him.
True, and there are North African bishops.
But what I don't know is whether the Anglo-Saxons are invaders or whether they are a mass change in the population, because certainly the Vikings are invaders who then settle, and the Normans are invaders who then settle. They don't bring over millions of Normans and change the country in that way.
I think the key point is that the country is ethnically and culturally a settled country for about 1,500 years.
Yes. From Alfred the Great, our great hero, who we will discuss more perhaps on every programme. Thank you to my panel. In a moment, I'll be speaking to a man on the front line of the free speech battle as the Brazilian Supreme Court bans Twitter.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It'll be back to school for many kids in the coming weeks, and my boy Jude starts school for the first time in a few weeks. Kate Stewart, who's a Liverpool entrepreneur, has just launched her annual school uniform appeal. It's an incredible initiative she set up a few years ago to ensure those who couldn't afford school uniforms for their kids can now access uniform for free. And we're delighted to be joined by Kate now. Was there any particular reason you decided to do this and help other families in the way you are?
Every child should walk through the doors in September ready to learn, focused on their learning and education, not thinking about what they're wearing or that their pants have got holes in or they haven't got brand new jumpers on.
You posted something on your social media, this incident with the Asda skirt. Somebody was not allowed to wear a skirt that looked similar to the uniform but was from Asda to help with with the costs?
I've campaigned tirelessly about this. Uniforms are put in place so everybody is the same. Children are the same as their peers. No designer wear is allowed, which I agree with. But schools are making their uniforms designer by insisting that their logo must be on the uniform. Now, a uniform from a supermarket can cost £20. Children fall over, they get holes in the pants. You can go to Asda and buy a new pair of pants for £3. When they've got the logo on, you're looking at £20. Stop the logos. Let's go back to basics. A school uniform consists of grey pants, a white shirt, a red, green, whatever colour cardigan, and make it accessible for families. If the schools want the logos on, then give it to the families to iron on or sew on. That's fine. Oh, so go onto my Instagram. It's Kate Stewart Life. The link's in my bio. And please give what you can. The price of a cup of coffee will make a massive difference.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Twitter has been suspended in Brazil by Supreme Court Judge Alexandra de Moraes. In response to this move, Elon Musk has referred to the judge as an evil dictator cosplaying as a judge and has criticised Brazil's censorship. Musk thanked Alliance for Defending Freedom International as it petitioned the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to intervene and confront this assault on free speech. Well, I'm joined now by Lorcan Price, Irish barrister and human rights expert from the Alliance for Defending Freedom. First of all, thank you very much for coming in. I used to be an emerging markets investor and used to invest in Brazil, which is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. That going into politics in Brazil is a much more profitable business than going into politics in the UK. Why should we mind that a corrupt country, which has pretty dodgy elections, is now banning Twitter?
Well, Brazil is a democracy, notwithstanding, I think it's fair to say that there are real problems with corruption. It has a constitution, it defends freedom of expression, and yet today we've seen the X banned across the entirety of the country. It's now essentially an offence, a criminal offence to access or use X and any of its facilities online. It's also an offence to try and get around the ban by using a VPN in order to do that. So I think that should concern us because we're seeing some very troubling things from other democracies. Normally we associate these kind of bans with Saudi Arabia and China, where they ban entirely internet companies from operating there. But we're seeing X investigated by the European Commission, for example. We saw the arrest of Pavel Durov, the CEO of Telegram. We're seeing in our own neighbourhood here very intense hate speech laws brought in Scotland and soon in Ireland. And we're seeing more and more arrests and prosecutions for speech. Not incitement to violent speech, which has been, as you well know, a crime for a long time in the common law and more recently codified, but for other type of speech offences, incitement to hatred. And what happened in Brazil, I think, is very concerning because the judge, de Moraes, in framing his suspension order of X, talked about misinformation as being one of the major problems. X propagates misinformation. And he specifically mentioned Brexit and the election of Donald Trump. So as far as a judge is concerned in Brazil, misinformation and democratic decisions like the election of the US president and the referendum in this country on membership of the European Union are all of the same piece.
And he's not a judge in a British sense, is he? That he's not an independent political figure. He's held political office. He is thought to be close to President Lula, who himself got sentenced to a term in prison for corruption, though that then overturned at a later stage.
Yes. Well, and of course, they have a very different system. Judges can commence investigations there, unlike our adversarial system here. However, we have an organisation in Europe called the European Commission that exercises powers in a way that's unaccountable in many ways, except to itself, that has extraordinary powers under the Digital Services Act to investigate online platforms. And we're seeing them prioritise misinformation and disinformation, so-called, as one of their targets. If you live in a democracy where you're not allowed to express controversial views for fear of offending those in power, you're not truly living in a free society.
And the problem with disinformation is that your definition of disinformation and mine is going to be different, because it tends to be information that I don't like or that you don't like.
Precisely. And these are totally elastic concepts, and they're used to suit whoever is making the rules, essentially. So what we're seeing with X in Brazil, I think, is the start of a move against X in other countries, other jurisdictions. The fact that it was really has not been condemned in any way by the US State Department or by governments in Europe is highly concerning. And you have then Bill Clinton's former Secretary for Commerce, Robert Reich, writing in The Guardian calling for the arrest of Elon Musk by virtue of the fact that he supports a free speech platform, or he allows free speech.
Purely on the grounds of his support for free speech.
Jacob, I don't think you can underestimate the extent to which free speech is a threat to certain people in power, whether it's on COVID or the war in Ukraine or open borders migration. All of the narratives have to be protected from public scrutiny. And so an online ecosystem of free exchange of views is something they are implacably opposed to.
This is like totalitarian regimes trying to block the world service, isn't it? That it's an attempt to stop a technology that is there because you don't like what is being said. How practical is it? How easy is it for Brazil to ban Twitter?
I think they're going to find it very difficult to police the ban. Use of VPNs is unregulated, essentially, and very technically difficult to regulate, as I understand it. But they're fining people $10,000 a day for that, which is more than the average annual wage in Brazil, or income in Brazil. And so they're going to use various tools to do this. This is what we see in China. As you're correct to say, the Soviet Union tried to block the world service by various technical means during the Cold War. And it's very sad that we're coming back to this creeping censorship across the world. The reason we're fighting it with the Inter-American Commission is there are still a right to free speech in international law. And let's see if that means anything. We have to try and uphold it as much as possible.
What is the power of the Inter-American Commission? What can it actually do?
Well, right now we've made an application under Article 41, which is the initial phase of compelling the Brazilian government to answer, essentially, provide information to the court and answer questions in relation to it. The next stage is to, a bit like the European Court of Human Rights, take an application on behalf of an individual to the court and to essentially find that Brazil, if it goes that far, is in breach of the...
And does Brazil have to accept it?
Well, it doesn't, but it would be, again, extraordinary for Brazil.
Does it tend to?
It does, because President Lula himself has described himself as a supporter of human rights. So that will be the next step we have to take.
Well, we'll see whether he sticks to his word. Thank you very much, Lorcan. Up next, it's Patrick Christys. Patrick, what have you got coming up this evening?
Well, loads on tonight, Jacob. Keir Starmer is tanking in the polls, which is quite an interesting thing, considering there is not currently an opposition to him, so we'll be talking about that. People, not just here in this country, but right across the continent, appear to be intent on ignoring ordinary people's concerns about illegal immigration. Yvette Cooper ramped up the old racism rhetoric again today. We'll get stuck into that. The winter fuel payments, or lack of, should that be put to a vote in Parliament now? It affects 1 in 7 people in this country. Is Keir Starmer running scared? And astronauts who are stuck in space have started hearing weird noises beamed into their spacecraft. We've got an audio recording. I'll play it for you.
OK, as a former Leader of the House, I've definitely given a vote on the winter fuel allowance. The opposition has the right to ask for important votes, and the Leader of the House an obligation to do it. Anyway, that's all from me. I'm back at 8 o'clock tomorrow. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Summit is going to be fantabulously beautiful. The sun will be shining and all be very happy. See you tomorrow.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. We've seen some big thunderstorms through the day today. Still a few rumbling on at the moment, but they are going to fade overnight. Tomorrow, a mix of sunshine and showers, and it is steadily turning fresher from the west. Quite warm and humid, though, in places at the moment. Our air is coming up from the south. This low pressure generating the heavy thundery showers, steadily clearing from northeast Scotland and then the Northern Isles. But some storms rumbling on well into this evening over parts of the Midlands, Northern England and Wales. They should start to ease through the early hours. Still quite warm and humid and murky over central and eastern parts, but turning fresher and cooler further north and west. Temperatures in parts of Scotland well down into single figures. Generally a fine and a sunny start across Scotland tomorrow as well. Certainly a much brighter, drier day across the northeast. But in western Scotland, a line of cloud and rain is creeping back in. That's extending down into Northern Ireland, so a pretty glum start to proceedings tomorrow here. Quite a lot of mist and low clouds still across parts of England and Wales as well, and still a few showers here, still keeping going through the morning, so you may wake up to a bit of a wet start here. And as we go through the day, we could see some further heavy showers developing over parts of East Anglia and maybe the far southeast of England. Still hit and miss, but some heavy downpours possible, particularly in the early afternoon. Much of northern England, Wales, southwest England, though, drier and brighter compared to today. And we'll still have some outbreaks of rain coming into the far northwest. Turning cooler and fresher, we could still get into the 20s across East Anglia and the southeast. And certainly a cooler, fresher start across eastern areas for Wednesday morning. Again, many places seeing plenty of sunny spells, but we will see more showers developing as we go through the day, particularly for Wales and England, Northern Ireland. Not too many, though, across Scotland. And temperatures much fresher feel by Wednesday, high teens for most.
Looks like things are heating up.